Well, if you've watched this show before, even just once, you know that I'm not a fan of debt collectors, and I'm sure not a fan of the credit card collectors. Too many of these people and their dirty practices are out of control. They're breaking federal law, they're abusive, they're over the top. Well, one New York lawyer, who happens to agree with me, has devoted his life work to tracking down and stopping these abusive debt collectors. I mean, this is fun. Attorney Joe Mauro is joining us, and he's brought along some of the shocking recordings of some of these debt collectors at work, and we're going to play some of them in a few minutes. But hey, Joe, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you for having me, Dave.
Awesome for having you. Thank you for coming in the studios and hanging out with us a little bit. Now, I read some of the stories of some of the lawsuits you brought, and you focused your whole practice around shutting some of these guys down that are misbehaving. Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, or at least keeping them in check. There are a group of us sort of nationwide that track these guys, the debt collectors, and they are oftentimes difficult to track. But yeah, we track them, we monitor what they do, and we sue them when necessary.
Difficult to track because they do. What? They just set up shop and then tear back down and run from the law?
Yeah, that's one of the hardest parts of our job, is keeping track on where they are, what entities they've set up to sort of shield them from the law. And you know, there's only a certain amount of hiding that they can really do, at least domestically. You know, we will eventually, if they're in the United States at least, we will usually be able to figure out who's behind all the corporate shells, and we'll usually be able to get to those people. And I guess the harder thing that's popping up these days is the international aspect of it. You have a lot of major U.S. companies that are shipping their debt collection overseas, particularly to India. And we are getting a lot of consumers that are complaining about getting harassive, abusive, and deceptive calls from people where they can barely understand what the collector is saying. Those people are more difficult to find because obviously they're outside of our jurisdiction, and they are often nameless, faceless people. But the horrifying part about it is the fact that there are major U.S. companies that are using these overseas debt collectors, and they are trying to essentially insulate themselves from liability by doing such.
Now sometimes they'll say, well, I'm with such and such a law office.
Yeah.
What does that usually mean?
Well, you know, sometimes it could be true. There could be a lawyer that is behind it. Whether that lawyer is, I guess in legal phrase, meaningfully involved enough so that the collector should be representing himself as calling from a law firm, that's another question. But sometimes it is just an outright lie, and the collector is in fact not a lawyer. That is actually one of the most common threats that we hear, is that I'm calling from a law firm and we're going to sue you tomorrow. And a large majority of the time that's just complete nonsense.
Now, what are some of the most abusive things that you've run into that these people are doing?
Yeah, well, I mean, that question gets asked to me a lot. I guess I've heard a lot of threats of physical violence, threats of sexual assault. I've heard requests for sex with the consumer's child. I guess, though, the most egregious one that always comes to my mind is comes out of a particularly charming little area of debt collection, and that is debt collectors who collect for funeral parlors. And I had a consumer, it was actually not my case, but it was from a few years ago, where the debt collector called looking to collect on a small balance that was due on a funeral bill, and the debt collector threatened that if the debt was not paid, that they were going to dig up the deceased and drop them on the consumer's lawn.
Oh my God.
That stands out in my head as probably the most abusive one that I've heard.
Oh man. Well, we've got some of the calls that you brought that are abusive, and you know, these things are pretty amazing. Let's go to one and listen to it.
Your payment bounced again. You've been putting these payments on file, they've been bouncing left, right, and sideways. You're never calling us back to tell us the problem. Therefore, you have a situation here. Start calling your friends, start calling your relatives. You need to come up with $636 by close business today, and it has to be MoneyGrammed into our office with a tracking number, or I'm turning this over to Mr. Collins on our warrants division, which will be issuing a warrant for your place of employment. Unless you want them coming in there and arresting you at your place of employment for theft by deception, fraud, of passing bad checks. I need 636. I need it today. I need that money control tracking number for 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You're in a world of trouble, Miss Mauro, a world of trouble.
So this character's threatening to arrest someone, which they totally can't do. That's a complete lie. And now, was this a case you took?
Yeah, that's a very recent case. The debt collector involved there is from Buffalo, New York. Buffalo is sort of a hub for these sort of debt collectors. That obviously is a complete lie. The debt collector was not going to arrest anybody, certainly doesn't have the ability to arrest anybody. And to date, I have never heard of any police agency getting involved in helping a debt collector arrest anybody. So yeah, that's completely false. The debt collector was likely calling from some boiler room in Buffalo with no access to law enforcement, and certainly nothing happened.
Were you able to track them down and get a punitive damage against them on this?
I do know who they are. Whether and when we're going to bring that suit remains to be seen. That is a very recent call, and it is, I guess, sort of indicative of what we're seeing in the overall economy these days. I guess with the boom of debt, of consumer debt that has gone into default, there is just an absolute spike in the amount of debt collection abuse calls that I'm seeing. I think that it's sort of a factor, a combination of factors. I think that it is just more fish in the barrel, so to speak. There's just more consumers in America these days that are in trouble. And second of all, an interesting note is the fact that the debt collectors themselves are in financial trouble, at least to a certain degree, because they are not able to pull any money out of the American consumer these days. And as they become financially strapped, they're becoming more desperate, and their calls are becoming more abusive.
And they're breaking the law more often.
Yeah.
Here's another abusive one where he calls the woman a ghetto, an uneducated reject. This is fabulous. Play that one for us, Daniel.
First of all, ma'am, that was pretty ignorant, but I wouldn't expect anything less from you because you are totally ghetto. Second of all, ma'am, learn English. Get an education. Since you're sitting on your fat derriere all day long, making money off the rest of the free working population in the country, you might want to try to get educated enough to at least be able to say payment plan instead of payment pan. You uneducated reject. How about you get a real job, get an education, and learn how to take care of your responsibilities like a grown adult would?
You know, it's hard to imagine to sit and make that call all day long. Because he uses, this guy uses these same lines in every call probably. Now, did you get a judgment on that one?
That wasn't my case. That is a recording that from a company that the Attorney General of New York is currently pursuing. That's from a few years ago. That company has been involved in numerous lawsuits that I'm aware of, yeah, that's a particularly nasty one. Again, that collector was calling from Buffalo, New York.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Let's throw in one more, and then I want to ask you some stuff about this, but I don't want to miss these because they're so wild. Here's one more where he's suggesting. Well, you'll just hear it, folks.
Oh man, you must stare at the ceiling all day and just have nothing to do. You got no life. You're just a loser. You're a loser. That's why you're in collections. Because you owe money you can't pay. Why don't you just go jump in front of a train? Why don't you do that? Get it over with. Just do it.
I love it. Suggesting to him suicide. I mean, it's just bizarre. And they do this stuff, of course, to get under people's skin and get them irrational and cause them to pay a bill that in some cases they don't even owe. Now,